Blessings and welcome to Black Religion Books, the official podcast of the African and Diasporic Religious Studies Association. Find out more about us at ADRSA.org. I'm your host, Iya Funlayo, PhD, the founding director of the ADRSA, and I am honored to welcome you to our very first episode. Brr, 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 brr. Yes, Black Religion Books will highlight books and occasionally films on Africana religions. And I am thrilled to be here for our first episode with Dr. Eric Bridges, Baba Ifasola, who is the editor along with Sheila Smith McCoy and Lawan Simpson Wilkie of the Wisdom of Ifa, an ancient paradigm for the 21st century and beyond. Dr. Bridges is a professor of psychology, an educational psychologist, and the director of the honors program at Clayton State University. He is also an Ifa priest. Aboru Aboye Aboshisheo.
Abato.
Yes, it's a pleasure to have you here. You know, we at the ADRSA really value scholar practitioner perspectives. And so it is such a joy and an honor to get to connect with you. And I am especially thrilled for us to be starting with this wonderful book on the wisdom of Ifa. And I am thrilled too to have contributed a chapter to this wonderful book. So I'll look forward to us diving a little bit into the chapter when we get there. But before we dive in, I would love to just start with a little bit of your background, you know, where you grew up, where you went to school, and what led you down the path of studying psychology and also studying Ifa.
Iya, they go hand in hand. So it's really interesting when students ask me, how did you get involved in Ifa? How did you get involved in African traditional religions? And they said, where was this demarcation? Where was the clear demarcation? And when they ask me that, I can't oftentimes tell them. So like a lot of African Americans, especially if you born and raised in the South, you go to church and all those things, but then you start finding out things about your family. So
Mm.
I always start off when you talk about my involvement and my going into, as might be said, into African traditional religions and Ifa, and then subsequently my studies in psychology. I don't separate the two. I oftentimes start off with this story. Who I said I'm going to write a book about him. It's going to be historical fiction. My maternal great uncle. So his name
Mm.
George Colbert. I don't know if I ever told you this. I don't think I have. His name was George Colbert. My grandfather, my maternal grandfather, died when my mother was 5, and so his brother, her uncle George, my great uncle, stepped in to raise her. So, like a lot of African American men in the South. So I'm from Atlanta. I was born in Atlanta. I was raised in Decatur, but my mother was raised in Atlanta with her sisters. And so when she was a little girl, her uncle George, would take her everywhere. And I'm a jump. It's gonna sound like I'm jumping around, but just to like make sure I have the full context. When I got initiated, the first time I got initiated to Yemonja, and I had on this white hat, and it had a blue feather in it. And I was over my mother's house, and she said, "Why you all into that African stuff?" And I said, "Ma, I love God with all my heart and soul, but we African. We've been working with the chicken in the foot for a long time." Her mouth dropped.
Come on now, we African. We've been doing this. We not new to this. We true to this.
So her mouth dropped. And I was like, oh my God, that's just so disrespectful. I was like, I'm sorry. She's like, no, it's not that. She was like, you don't exactly look like him, but I think you the reincarnation of him. I was like, who are you talking about? She was like, my great uncle. She's like, my uncle, my great uncle, George. And I was like, nah, I don't think I'm the reincarnation, because he's literally, so this, I can go there on your show. I can go spiritual. He literally saved my life. Now he's in the ancestral realm. He's been in the ancestral realm ever since I've been alive. But he has saved my life on numerous occasions. I can hear his voice. Even at the university where I teach at, students that can see spirits, they see him. They describe him to a T. So I told my mother that. And so I said, why do you think I'm the reincarnation of George Colbert? And she said, because one time, back in the day in the South, where the elder women used to fix the men's plate. And she was fixing his plate and she threw it at him on the table. And she said, the Lord don't like what you're doing. And he said, I love God with all my heart and soul, but we African, we've been working with the chicken and foot for a long time. My mother was like, the exact same words. So ever since then, I have been fascinated. So anyway, back to his life. So like my great aunt who raised my mother, her, my grandfather, and my Uncle George, they were all related. She was a devout Christian. Turned out my Uncle George, my great Uncle George, would take my mother everywhere he went. He had a numbers house and bootleg liquor house in Atlanta. And I'm not going to tell you what else he was doing. You can probably guess.
Right.
So he was making money. At any point,
he was making a way out of no way, like we do. That's what we do. Okay.
You do it. He was doing it because he was one of them brothers that loved his family. At any point in time in their house, their immediate house, because even though he had that bootleg liquor house, he lived with my mother and my great aunt. He would have $30,000 in the house. So anyway, he would take my mother everywhere, and she adored him. But my great aunt Sally, who raised my mother, they call her Mama Sally, she forbade him. She forbade him. Let me get the tenses right. From taking her to Louisiana. And so my mother tells a story about how one day she came home. Well, she came to his house after school. She must have been like 7 or 8. And she was standing on the porch, and the white cops came to arrest him. And she said they could not step foot on his property. And my great uncle was taunting them, like, come on, y'all can come and arrest me. And she said it was the strangest occurrence. Like they literally were trying to step foot on his property and they couldn't. Then I knew why he was going to Louisiana. My mother said I did not have any idea until I started putting 2 and 2 together that he must have been going down to Louisiana having some stuff done. I was like, Mama, he going down there getting some spiritual medicine. Turned out they found out he had a girlfriend who was initiated to Vodun. She was doing his medicine. So bringing it up to present day, just a few weeks ago, maybe about 2 months ago, there's a sister from my university. She's from Louisiana. We don't know where my great Uncle George is buried. She's a medium. Now, this sister got a PhD in English, but she a full-fledged medium. I had been for about a month before I met her, very interested after the book, while this book was being in the process of being published. I had become interested in Baron Samedi. I don't know why. She looked at me. She said, your great uncle was initiated to Baron Samedi. She was like, the ritual you talk about, we don't know where he's buried. So my, everybody got a big mama. That was his oldest sister. When he died, so his sister Sally, she was really upset because some men came from Louisiana and took his body back to Louisiana. So all my family is buried in one cemetery here in Atlanta. But his body, we don't know where it is in Louisiana. When I told the sister who works at my university this, she was like, I know he's buried the Baron Samedi. That was initiated. Forgive me for that. Was initiated to Baron Samedi because that is what they do. So I say all that to say this stuff is ancestral. Like
Yes.
it came up. So I was raised, when I was born African Methodist Episcopalian and baptized Baptist. And, all my life, I just been, as my mama say, just been interested in Africa. And when I was a teenager, I started studying, African traditional religions. Not formally, I wasn't part of an elay or anything like that, but it was just literally ancestral. And then juxtapose that with my paternal grandmother who had suffered with pancreatic cancer. And when the doctors told her that she was going to die, she yells at them and say, "You don't know my God." And she lived 27 years after that diagnosis.
Come on.
And went into remission. So when I was a teenager, so when me and my brother were teenagers, we went to go visit her in the hospital, and she was on whatever medications they give you to take away the pain, the opioids, whatever. She thought that we were angels. So when we walked in the room, my mother said, "Those ain't angels, those are fallen angels." She said, "Those are fallen angels," like that. And so years after my grandmother went into remission, I asked her, I said, "Why do you think you survived?" And she was like, "My faith." And I had to study that. And the only discipline besides religion that I gravitated to was psychology. I had to understand how could someone's faith, especially Black people's faith. I think that's very much applicable to what we're going through now, like geopolitically, which is the reason why, we didn't know Trump was going to get elected, but I think it's very timely. Like this deep, unwavering, it's beyond words faith that Black people had. And I just had to understand it psychologically. So to the both questions, that's how I got involved in African traditional religions. And then also my trajectory of becoming a psychologist. And it's real interesting because when I got initiated, I was told, so I can be kind of candid here, but professional. I was told that European American women would be my blessings professionally. So some of the priests was like,
professionally.
Yeah, professionally. So we say professionally, they were going to be my blessing. And so I say that to say, to combine both, my embracing my love of Ifa, because my mama said, "You love Ifa." And then my professional aspirations. When I got initiated, they said, I literally have to, my intellectual work has to revolve around Ifa. And so when I, one time in academia, you may know this, it's something we have to go through called an annual review, wherein all the things you did that year, you do a portfolio and then they do a interview with you. So it's a negotiation. And so my department chair, she's retired. She is a European American woman. She asked me, she said, "What are the most important things you did this year?" I just started listing all my Western academic accomplishments. And she looked at me and she said, "Why do you compartmentalize your life?" And I was like, "Go deeper." She was like, "I can think of something that you did that literally," I was getting ready to say the T word, TRUMT, but I'm not going to say that word. But anyway, she think of something that literally
that supersedes, right?
that supersedes all of that. So I was like, "Well," she said, "You got initiated." She was like, "That's what I mean." She was like, "Don't compartmentalize your life." And I'm gonna tell you exactly what I said. And so I'm going to make sure that I'm sensitive to the entire audience. I said, "You know what, white girl, you right." I was like, literally, she said, "I just don't understand why you compartmentalize your life." And I said, "It's funny you say that because I was told that in Africa, do not do that. Combine both." So you asked that question, right? Which is like it's as the old folks say, it was divinely ordained. Because you asked me, how did you get involved in both of those? And that is solidification. Like the compartmentalization does not work. I know that
Mm.
was a lot.
No, yes, it was, and it was so rich and wonderful. And I thank you for sharing all of that. And it's so interesting how our trajectories are similar in that way because when I first came into Ifa, I got initiated, and then that drove me to want to learn more about Ifa, and that was what inspired me to get the PhD. And as I was in my PhD program, I really saw myself as a scholar who was going to study Ifa. I mean, I knew I was a priestess and I was doing my own personal duties in my priesthood, but didn't necessarily see myself as a priest who was going to serve the public per se.
Mhm, mhm.
And, on one of my anniversaries of initiation, when I got my reading, Ifa was like, you can't just be studying and writing about this. Like, you got to be out here praying for these people and doing
Yeah, yeah,
rituals
yeah,
and
yeah,
doing. And so that's how your favorite scholar priestess, right, came to be, where it's like, no, you got to be both and do both. And, we so often, particularly as practitioners and scholars of Africana religions, we have to tread both of those lines, right? We have to be able to make what we're doing understandable to those in the academy so that we are able to do the work that we can do utilizing its resources and utilizing its frameworks where they're applicable and where they are workable. And then we also are responsible to our communities, right? Because I feel like more than in other disciplines, the books that we produce, like this wonderful book you've just produced, The Wisdom of Ifa, it's not only scholars who are going to read this, right? It's the community who is really hungry for a lot of this information. And so we are always in this place of, wanting to give enough meat to the practitioners and to those who hold this faith commitment, as well as be scholarly enough, so to speak, that we're able to transcend. And this is one of the things that I found, kind of turning to the book, that the book did really well. And also, I'll say that in the story that you just told, it gave me some insight as well into your first book that you edited, Recovering the African Feminine Divine in the Literature, the Arts, and Practice, Yemonja Awakening. So as a priest of Yemonja, that makes, that just gave me some more insight into that. Give me a little bit about that. What led you down the path of that first book, or towards making Yemoja the first divinity that was focused on? Because in the first book, you focused on Yemoja. In this book, we focus on Ifa. What drew you into, along with your co-editors, putting together that first volume about Yemoja?
As a psychologist and a priest, things get esoteric.
Yes.
They get a little mystical. And it's really funny because all my elders who initiated me know how their biggest worry about me was that I was too intellectual. And
Hmm.
so I think the spirit world like really drives home things intellectually. And I say that so the birth of that book. So the lead editor on that book, Lawan Simpson Wilkie, before we even like knew it was going to become a book, we had a conversation. So I was at my university. She used to work at my university, but she moved to another university. So the university, there's 26 schools in the university system of Georgia. So she went to another school in the university system of Georgia, and she called me one day, and I don't know if she was reading. So her background is African American literature, and I know she studies Zora Neale Hurston primarily. I think Toni Morrison. So she called me one day here when I was in my office, and she said, "I'm reading this chapter. I think that was written by Zora Neale Hurston, and it was a picture of a woman, a very beautiful woman who looked very strong, and it was a lot of blue around her." So you
Hmm.
know where I'm going. And so she was like, she's a devout Christian, as we'll talk about in her chapter where she interviewed a minister and an Ifa priest and a Eshu priest. So she is a devout Christian, But something, it was like she said, I know this has something to do with the Orisha. So I'm
Hmm.
you. So I chuckled. I was like, it might be Yemonja. Then all of a sudden, Emily Williams uh, from Lexington Press, she has a series on the Afro Caribbean uh, legacy. I forget the full series that both books are published under. And she said, "Do you all want to do a book on um, on the Orisha, on any Orisha?" So we were just like, "Yeah, we can do the." I was initiated to Yemoja. The one has she saw this picture of this woman surrounded in blue. You know, if you practice a shay, that could be something else. But all we knew then at that time is that Yemonja was very much, very much vested with blue. And then Sheila McCoy Smith is Sheila Smith McCoy. She would be so mad at me for getting that name mixed up like that. She is a Yemonja worshiper. So that's the story. That book was really mystical in the sense that even one of the contributors of that book who contributed to the second book on Ifa, and we'll get to his chapter. And so I'm gonna save that because blew my that blew my mind. He wrote, so it's Michael Lindsay. So I'm jumping. I don't want to say gun. I'll try not to use analogies around violence, but I'm just jumping to his chapter to give us a prelude. When he wrote his chapter in the Yemonja text, he literally went in trance. So he's a Christian from North Carolina. He go in trance. Yemonja talking to him. And so I let the Yemonja priest read his chapter. And they like, how long has he been initiated to Yemonja? I said, homeboy ain't initiated to Yemonja. So jump into this book.
Wow.
When he was trying to write a chapter on E5, he thought that he can go just meditate and go in trance, and nothing was coming. And I was like, E5, the E5 priesthood is not a possession priesthood. I was like, now, E5 can take over, but you have to know the literature. And he was like, this makes sense. And I was like, the Orisha, no. I shouldn't be so arrogant to say this, but I like tangible proof. That was my tangible proof, right? Like he was like, yeah, the first book, I went into trance, meditated, the things were coming like this. This book, this chapter, nothing's coming. I was like, Ifa is not a trance.
Ifa is a priesthood of study, right? Ifa is a priesthood of study. And we do, like you said, the spirit can come, Ella, and the spirit can come in and help to bring out that which we've taken in and
Exactly.
cataloged, right?
Exactly.
And help us discern what parts of it we're accessing at that moment. But ultimately the study and it has to have, it's like computer programming, right? It can only access what you've already put in there.
So to the point about the Yemonja text, it was really strategic because the two sisters, the two women were the two, like, so it was Lawan Simpson Wilkie and Sheila Smith McCoy. So I was like the third one. And so it was very much, a divine feminine thing. With this one, me being an Ifa priest, they were like, you take, I didn't even say, I was like, I'm gonna take the lead on it. And so
right.
that's how the Yemonja text came into being.
Beautiful. That's such a beautiful story. I love that. And I love, how spirit makes itself known in all the ways, right? Yeah. I came through like, all right, yeah, y'all about to write this book about me, and I'm about to, inspire somebody who ain't even initiated to write about me and to do all of these, things to help, again, bridge these gaps. And that's a lot of what we're doing and bringing. What I love about this, turning to the wisdom of Ifa, I love the fact that we brought it into the 21st century and beyond. And so, what we're focusing on is not looking at it as just an ancient tradition, right? Which is sometimes how things that are African get frozen in time and get decontextualized and detemporalized, right? To where it's something that existed back then, but really thinking into how this ancient wisdom and why it persists, right? Because something is not going to persist if it's not offering something today. If it was only offering something 500 years ago, it would be gone by now. But the fact is that it continues to help us today. And so I really appreciated that even as a starting point of the book. And then, looking at all of the wonderful contributions, we've got 11 different contributions and also your introduction that make up the book. And I was so excited to see that the first contribution, the first chapter was an interview with none other than our Baba Wande Abimbola, who, for those who may not be familiar with him, is the Awishe Agbaye, or the spokesperson for Ifa in the world. One of the first, if not the first, scholar practitioner, right, to have published his work, become a university professor, publish his work in academic contexts, and just a powerhouse, and a really distinguished elder. So tell me what that conversation was like. I mean, I read through it. You had some wonderful questions. Was there any one particular moment of the interview or a particular question that you asked or answer that he gave that comes to your spirit to bring forward?
That chapter, I can't even say in honesty, yeah, like there was one question, just because everything was just amazing. But I think if I think about anything, just me being a person, so I teach a class called Human Development.
Mm-hmm.
So when I got initiated to Ifa, my blessings came in Ire Ayaku. And so, I was like, and I always sensed it, that I was probably going to have the potential to have an extremely long life.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm one of those ones that's very much meticulous about health and everything. And
Right. I be seeing your workouts. That's a sidebar, but I be seeing all of that too. You know what
so
I'm saying?
it's funny we talk about that because when I got initiated, my old dude Ifa that came during my Ita was talking about Orisha Eco, the Orisha of health, and so I was like,
Mm.
oh, this makes so much sense. So when Baba, Dr. Abimbola, when he literally is talking about in that chapter, we talk about an emerging field called epigenetics and then
Mm-hmm.
longevity studies. And he goes into this story about JJ, like this whole thing about doing things gently. And he talks about in that chapter, that interview, and that was such a, I'll get to all three interviews, but when he talked about there was a Babalawo who died maybe about, I think, 300 or 400 years ago, who was over 3,000 years. And I just was like, so someone who studies longevity and epigenetics, like this epigenetics is basically what your ancestors give you biologically.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's very much spiritual, even on a, people say it's science, but it's very much spiritual. So when he talked about this Babalawo that lived for over 3,000 years, and Baba, Dr. Abimbola is very much meticulous when it comes to his character. He does not fabricate or exaggerate anything. So when he said that, I was like, this in many instances is going to challenge the whole Western notions of longevity, you
Hmm.
know. And so that one really stuck out to me. And then when he said that in the chapter, so kind of like spoiler alert, that when it was before he was born, his parents did an Ifa because he kept returning, so he was Abiku, and so
Hmm.
he would come and he would leave, and his mother would, they would have the pain of all of that. So his mother was initiated to Kabiesi Shango, well-known Shango priest, and I think he said, if I remember correctly, his father was initiated to Ogun. So they brought in a Babalawo to do the divination, and when they did it about what they needed to do to keep him on this plane, they would say he's going to ask you when he's a certain age, he's going to want to do something, and neither one of you are going to agree with it. You have to let him do it. And so when he was, I forget if he was 9 or 10 or 11, he up until that approximate age, he had been under the tutelage of a well-known Babalawo not far from the village he was born in. So he saw some boys walking home from school and they had on their uniform. So he said, where y'all coming from? And they said school. So he was like, what do you all do there? And we learned how to read. And he was like, what is that? And so he said that they kind of looked at him as if he was uneducated. So he went back to his parents and asked them, he said he wanted to go to school. And especially his father was very much against it. He was like, no, you will not go to school. And so Dr. Wande Abimbola went on a hunger strike. And so,
wow.
And so his mother had to convince his father, like, look,
remember what it was said. We have to let him do.
Exactly. Remember what it was said. So it was this, we talk about how our trajectories are similar. When he said that, because I never knew he had this rebellious streak, and I do too, because my parents would do things and I would be like, well, I'm gonna run away from home and I'm going to stay with my grandmother. And my mother, I did that at 6. So I was joking with them. They didn't make the interview. I was like, wow. So I say it's real applicable that I'm interviewing you because we both have this rebellious spirit. And so, with that interview, it was really amazing because as you know, that's an honor to sit and talk with him. But he is so wonderfully grounded.
Mm-hmm.
He is so magnificently down to earth. And it's little simple things with him. It's not like he is something earth shattering. It's literally so simple that is powerful. It's literally like do. And I never thought about it because what we say with Ifa and do, that is how his wisdom, it literally is so powerful. It's like dew. It's not like a thunderstorm. That is what really resonates with me. It's just that kind of power, that gentle power. And during that, one of the things, and like I said, I'm being preemptive. I'm just, talking. It was 3 interviews in that book, and the publishers, to their credit, but I had to convince them. As you know, in academia, especially in academic publishing, they don't like interviews.
Right.
So they, of course, this didn't make it to the book, but this is on your show. So literally, they didn't want the interviews published the way the interviews were published. They wanted the interviews centered around secondary scholarly sources. And so I something in my spirit.
And you're like, this man is a scholarly source. If you understood, would you know what we knew?
That's what I told him. Because
and understood African knowledge, where he is the keeper of this wisdom of more than any books that we could cite.
Because they didn't know.
Of course.
So we clear on that. So I sent them a long email and I said, the 3 people, especially Dr. Abimbola, these are the people that the Western trained scholars go to in order to get the information. Exactly. Why am I going? That's just like if
you're going to cite somebody else who's citing him.
Exactly. Right. I said, that's just like me as a physicist and Albert Einstein is alive, but I'm going to go find people that have cited Albert Einstein's work and give them primacy when I can talk to Albert Einstein. And then, so to her credit, Emily Williams, who is a sister, she wrote an email to the publishers and to us. She said, I'm very vested in this conversation because I want to see how it's going to be handled. Because Dr. Bridges makes a really interesting point. So, in other words, the sister was flexing her power.
Yes. Yes. Which we love when we have the opportunity to do that, because they can be few and far in between in these spaces. And I love that. I appreciate you sharing that aspect, that sort of behind the scenes, so that it, it helps our listeners and our constituents to understand the work that we still have to do on the back end as scholars, bringing our tradition into these spaces that are not made for it, right? Where we are bringing it in, where the paradigms of knowledge that we're using are largely not intelligible in the same way, where the world senses that we're working with, to use Oyeronke Yewumi's term, are not as understood, right? And so I am thankful, right, that you were able to advocate for that, and that you had assistance in advocating for making sure that Baba Abimbula's voice was heard, and again, not filtered through other folks who have cited him and happen to have published it, but for himself. And I mean, the precedent for that too comes, of course, from his Ifa Will Mend Our Broken World, which was all full interview, right? And so rich, and so filled with goodness. And so I appreciated reading the interview here as well, because since we're coming in now to a new paradigm, a new generation, he's an elder, he's lived through so many things and seeing so many things, and to understand where we're at now, right? And to embrace some of what he is saying about where we are now as compared to where we were at the time that those initial interviews were done. It was a really, really beautiful continuation, synergy. Great to hear his voice in that way. So I'm really happy that that was a part of the book. That as I continued, people call me an Ori evangelist, talking about Ori and our sacred selves. So I was absolutely delighted to see Chapter 2, Ori and Ifa, Navigating a Contentious World, by our brother Eric Adewuyi Mason. And this place where he's highlighted the nature of Ori and how it helps us to live a successful life now. And I think that's a great place to talk about where we see, Ifa intersecting with life now, what you think the continued salience is. Partially as Dr. Mason has said it, but some of your own perspectives on that as well, of where Ifa meets us in the 21st century, and where these aspects of ourselves, like Ori, like our divination, like the other aspects of our tradition, how do they meet us here in this time we're in?
I'm smiling because this chapter, and I talked to brother, like he and I are really good friends. We were talking about you. And before I go into his chapter, we were talking about you because we you know how brothers are. he from New Orleans, I'm from Atlanta, and so we have to we hardcore Southern African American. So we get on the phone and we could start talking about anything. So I was talking about going back to the chapter where I interviewed Dr. Abimbola. I had asked Baba, I said, I don't think this made it into the chapter, but we talked about it. He was like, he was like, once you all as Ifa priests learn the basic art of chanting Ifa in a Shei, if that's where you get initiated, then he was like, the context of which you all exist as Africans in America, once you master the way the origin has been done, then contextualize it for where you are. And so, because when I chant Ifa, I like literally try to chant Ifa like a hip hop artist or R&B. And then so brother Eric said, That's
Hmm.
Iya Funlayo. Like she literally is chanting Ifa like the old sisters in the black church. And I was
Mm.
so that's why we were talking about you.
I
That's
love that. Oh, I'm so
because
honored by that.
you I have a champion, and she's down at Wiley now, and she always says you always need a champion and sponsor to talk about you when you ain't around.
That's right. That's
You
right.
always need it. And so before I go into his chapter, because that's something extra. When you were talking about like we were talking about how our scholarship oftentimes isn't centered. And one of the things, and I keep telling you, and I mean this with all my heart, because I truly love you and adore you. Because what you
Mm.
do, I'm gonna tell you why we have to do this work. Like when I go into the databases, the intellectual databases, and when I type in Ifa, and Ifa is, I'm saying this, Ifa is for everyone. But when
Yes.
I'm doing scholarship, a lot of times I'm not seeing that scholarship looking like the original humans. You
Right.
know what I'm talking about. And so I'm like, and then it is so critical because I went to a National Council of Black Studies and there was this powerful roundtable panel discussion about how well oiled these wheels of how these wheels of academia are oiled with white supremacy.
Mm.
And there were
Mm.
scholars on there who are powerhouses. One sister I'll never forget, she broke down and was crying. Brothers who were powerhouses were cursing in front of 500 people. That's how emotional this was. Because as you know, as a sister who is a scholar, you know what I'm saying? And I'm a brag about you, not because, Noam Chomsky called them nice finishing schools, but when any black person get a PhD from Harvard, because that is no joke. And so you know how powerful this whole system is. And so
Do.
she was crying because she was like, when you look at something called impact factor, like you literally, like they it's so wet, like your work can get out there right, and all of them, like it's 10,000 people citing you. That's impact factor. And she was
Yes.
like, with us, she was like, it's a mission to cite us.
That's
So,
right.
like when I saw what you did in your chat, and I never told you this, I was like, she know the power. And so when you talk about these new paradigms, it's incumbent. And Dr. Abimbola, he said it's incumbent for us to own this.
That's
It,
right.
it is so incumbent. So bringing it to Eric Mason's chapter, because we talk all the time. I I wanted that chapter to be, I told him, I was like, this chapter might make some Ifa priests mad.
Mm.
The reason, and I want, so I'm going on your show. I have never said this publicly. I purposely wanted that chapter in there to challenge this whole notion of Ifa as destiny.
Mm. Mm.
You see, because his whole notion is radical free will. That's
Yes.
so because like when
I
if I'm
love
doing
that, bringing it out of that sort of Calvinistic aspect of destiny and into the fact that we have chosen the path and that we are still free to choose. It's not even like what we chose initially is frozen in place. We continue to make these choices. I love that.
yeah, it is so powerful because I'm thinking to myself, like you could do a whole show with each one of these contributors, but you
Yes.
definitely could do a whole show with him because that was radical. Because when I'm doing dot files for people, like I tell them, they say, "Oh, E5 is the Orisha of destiny." I said, "No, it's not. It's no like literally, he's challenging this notion of destiny."
Mm. I'll
And
tell you what's interesting too. Wow. And I love that in the chapter. And it reminded me back of my own studies when, I was challenging the word. I do a lot with Yoruba language and with analyzing the words. And when I went into studying the language and I saw that the word iping, that's usually translated as destiny, actually means division. Right? And I was like, well, what do we gain now by seeing it as division rather than destiny, right? Taking off that aspect of something that's imposed upon us as we tend to see the concept of destiny, and think about it as a dividing, like what it brought me to was that biblical idea of rightly dividing the word of truth, right? All the things that are on our path being put in their proper place, and us being able to access all that we're meant to access of ourselves. And when I tell you that, and I ain't gonna name no names because I'm gonna be cool, but certain scholars were hot with me behind that and came at my neck, like really came at my neck. And men, I'm gonna say they was men, that's all I'm gonna say. But yeah,
were they Ifa practitioners?
Yeah. Well, that was part of the issue, was they actually were not practitioners, but were scholars of the tradition, right? Who are also deeply involved, but not practitioners. And so that was a part of the little tension as well. But challenging, and that's another thing. And one reason I wanted to really make sure we talked about that chapter and just highlighted this, aspect of pushing things further, right? And understanding that being a part of a tradition doesn't mean just wholesale accepting what the tradition says, particularly not the way that it's been translated, right? When we are talking about translation, and this is something that I worked with very heavily early in my scholarship, was looking at the ways that translation has negatively impacted some of our ideas of things. And so for me and for Dr. Mason and for you, as we're discussing this, clearly this idea, this translation of Ipin as destiny has sort of narrowed down the real true meaning of what it is, and was sought to put it more in alignment with Christianity, which is what a lot of the early Africana scholars did, like our, Bolaji, Dowu, and John Mbiti, and those folks who were priests, and who, I respect their work because what they were doing was radical for the time that they were doing it. But now those of us who are practitioners and who are saying, hey, we don't have to try to make this analogous to Christian theology. It's actually more revolutionary and advantageous for us to highlight where it is different and where it's unique and where it may be even more useful for us in its uniqueness.
That's facts. That's facts all day. As you were talking, I thought about a Babalawo who's actually a godson of Dr. Abimbola. I call him Madu, but I think one of his priest names is, and so I'm putting him all on the spot if he hear this interview, and because he tries to be incognito and be a hermit and all that, but you give your elders props, and so
that's right.
One of his priest names is Orisha Baby, so he's a godson of Dr. Abimbola, and he said something that's analogous to what you just said. He was like, it's time for the young scholars who are practitioners to start telling this story. Like you talk about, one of the things when I teach my class, I teach a class called the Psychology of the Africana Experience. So a lot of them are interested in, West African traditions. And so they talk about, Olodumare is God. I was like, no, Olodumare is not God. I was like, no. And so I was like, they are not equivalent. God is seen in that Abrahamic sense. And so, and you and Dr. Mason, y'all know more because he has a PhD. Eric Mason has a PhD in religion. So I always defer to you all, but I was like, with my limited understanding, like God, the Christian Abrahamic God don't go to nobody for divination because it's not trying to evolve, because it's already perfect.
Right.
I was like, Olodumare is becoming. Olodumare still goes to get Dafa. because Olodumare is still evolving. That's something greater than being perfect.
Mm, mm,
That's something
mm.
greater, because when you perfect,
Ooh, that's a soundbite right there. Being in a state of evolution
exactly,
is greater
than being
being
perfect.
perfect. I love that.
And so, challenging, these whole notions about, what is destiny and what is the purpose of Ori. And as you know, with the Odu that fell for the year, Ori is like front and center, and I
Mm-hmm.
think it's really time, because one of the things, I'll just say this personally, as an intellectual and as a working priest, when I do DAFA, and one of the things, like, I've literally had clients that when I tell them that they have to like depend on their Ori, they get upset.
Yeah, listen, trust me, I know. I know.
Like, Iya, I did not know that, because I would, and so to me, I'm just like, no, that's a powerful thing. So they was like, no, we don't have to lean
People
on,
want to be told what to do because the paradigm that we've been raised with has taught us to mistrust ourselves. It has taught us that we don't have the answers, that we have to ask someone else, that we can't rely on our own, lean not on your own understanding, that type of thing, where we have to consistently look to something other than ourselves to have understanding. And so it's revolutionary. And I teach this all the time, that Ori and honoring yourself and honoring your knowledge and honoring the consciousness that you have is revolutionary,
very
because everything that we've been raised with has taught us not to do that, especially as Black folks. Right?
facts.
We've been taught that we are supposed to follow these particular paradigms, and to assimilate into these particular ways of being. And so, unfortunately, I find that even many of us who have been initiated, right, are still actually following these sort of Christocentric ideologies, patriarchal ideologies, and other things that actually come from other cultures and traditions that we've now folded in to Ifa, or folded into our practice of African spirituality. And so it's really revolutionary, for me, and it was important for me. And I appreciate this about, I can see in many of the chapters here, is pushing the paradigm, is bringing things forward in a new way, not just regurgitating the same information, but really taking that next step to do another analysis and say, let's look at this again and let's re-examine it. And that's how every tradition has evolved. That's how every tradition's scholarly trajectory has evolved.
And the thing that is so good about everything you said. I want to ask you a question before I go on. So when you challenge them, have you ever published that scholarship that you did where they were like, when you were talking about what was the term again?
Iping, about Iping. Yeah, it's actually in my forthcoming book on the kola nut.
Okay.
It is in my dissertation as well, and the book is an outgrowth of the dissertation. It's going to be significantly different because I have new chapters, but yes,
So
definitely,
I'm getting
it's
ready
out there.
So I'm getting ready to ask the question, like, so for the audience. So this is just for me personally, as Scott. I can access your dissertation through Harvard. It's open.
You can. Harvard's dissertations are open access. Yes.
She know why I'm asking that, so because I gotta read it. But one of the things is when you're talking about, you know, pushing the paradigm. And one of the things that me personally, I'm meticulous with, because I'm on those internets. I'm on them. I'm trying to get away from Meta because of
Right.
everything. But I look at what some very, I dare say, preeminent priests, what they're putting on social media. And so I'm always sensitive. To be honest with you, I'll be fully transparent. When I did the Game on Jaw text, the first time I was really afraid because
Hmm.
I knew what people say on Facebook, because they will read stuff and somebody, and we ain't calling no names, but you know who I'm talking about. There is one priest that if they see like it's a glaring mistake, they gonna highlight it. They're gonna put it on. They're gonna put it on there. So I literally was vetting things very meticulous. And the reason why I say that, because not to be egocentric, it is part of my personality to push things, but I always push them once I feel like the foundation is solid. I'm not gonna push nothing until I know what, as the old folks say, you know what you know, and then
Right.
you push it forward. Because I think it has to be a balance. Because I'm always trying to respect my elders.
Sure.
Like I'm always, so I'm betting things. But then one of the things that is so critical, and this is not to be elitist, this is not. And so if people take it as such, my apologies, it's not me. But when I was talking with Dr. Abimbola, he said something to me that was like really, really powerful. It was profound. He was like, the Ifa priesthood, so the only thing that's the equivalent of Ifa in the Western world is the academy.
Mm.
And when he said, so I was like, wow, he was like, that's the closest thing in the Western world to the Ifa priesthood. He was like, the Ifa priesthood, they're intellectuals.
Right.
And so he was like, and I'm telling all his business, and he can get on me. But he was like, I don't even celebrate when my children and my grandchildren just get bachelor's degrees. I throw them parties when they get PhDs, because that's the equivalent of having, like, being an Ifa priest. That's the closest in the Western world, without you getting initiated to Ifa, that Ifa priests will be like, okay. And I'm not going to go further. I think you know where I'm going. But that
No,
is,
absolutely. And I think that's an apt analogy in terms of the time, really, the time commitment, the apprenticeship, right? All of these different things, the ways in which we are called to present our knowledge, right, in ceremonial spaces. I think that's a very apt comparison.
it's almost like, now I don't know up there where you are, because I think you in North Carolina now, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, but down here in Atlanta, one of the things that I'm really sensitive about, like when I go to Nigeria and I see them like meeting monthly, like twice a month at each other's houses, and it's the exchange of knowledge. And I'm just like, we don't do that.
Right.
Like, we have to do that
We
as
do.
as Orisha priest over here. The form that, and I don't blow people's heads up. What you doing is important, because
Mm.
this is very much how those ideas, it's this debate. And like you say, it is like, it is time for us to really have these serious debates about, how Ifa looks over here,
Mm-hmm.
mastering it, and then what does that mean? And among very conscientious and serious and not ego driven.
Right. Right.
Okay? Because even in the academy, when we have conferences, folks can show out, with PhDs, and it's a certain humility that is incumbent that we do this. So,
Right.
because like
That's a part of Iwapele, right?
exactly.
Our humble and gentle character, that we're not doing this to aggrandize ourselves. We're doing this to advance humanity, right? And to make life better for all of us.
And I know you want to move on to the other chapters, but with Eric Mason's chapter, one of the things that I think is like timely. So as a psychologist, a lot of people may not be aware that some of the a lot of the Western psychologists, they study various what they call indigenous practices to come up with their theories.
Absolutely.
And so
Absolutely.
one of the things,
Young, Hillman, all of them that we saw.
Sigmund Freud,
Mhm.
Sigmund Freud studied in Edward Bruce Biden's work, The African Unconscious. Sigmund Freud was studying West African spiritual traditions.
Yes.
He was so afraid of him that his protege Young just took it further. I say
Right.
that to say, because in Eric Mason's chapter, he goes into the psychology, and so
Yeah.
I'm just like, as a psychologist, all I can do is smile.
I love that. Well, and one of the things that it really highlights, and one of the things I love about this book, that it has so many different scholars from different disciplines. You know, you have me, Africana Studies and Religion, Dr. Mason, you know, in religion. We have literary scholars, we have scientists, we have anthropologists. It really shows the, to use Lewis Gordon's term, transdisciplinary nature of the study of Ifa and of the study of life, period, right? The fact that everything is broken up into these disciplines is really like, you know, in an attempt to control it and an attempt to compartmentalize and not let us see the fullness and the wholeness of who we are as human beings. So I really appreciate that there is such a wonderful a variety of scholars and disciplines that are represented here. You know, time flies when you're having fun. So I just want us to touch on maybe one or two more. Of course, I've got to touch on the gender piece, right? You said that you thought the Ori part was going to be a little controversial. And I know that Sheila Smith McCoy's To Harness My Own Power, Ifa, Gender and Healing, that may be another controversial one. And as much as I didn't think it was controversial, I figured, you know, my chapter, which is called The Oshun Effect, Beyonce, Ifa, and the Complexities of Black Women's Empowerment. You know, there's definitely controversial things that are that are there in both of those. Gender has been a contested topic in Ifa. There are those who say that women aren't even supposed to be initiated as Ifa priests. There are those who say lots of different things around Ifa and gender. Talk to me a little bit about that and about, you know, that Dr. McCoy's chapter and mine, even as a man, as taking them in, kind of seeing the things that we said on our various fronts, some of your thoughts about that and reactions.
You know, just from a serendipitous, like right off the top. So your chapter was the Oshun effect. You initiated to Oshun, and then Sheila Smith McCoy interviewed an Oshun priestess who actually happens to be my god sister Oshun Damishi here in Atlanta. We might as well be brother and sister, like biologically, because we love like this and we fight like cats and dogs. And I say that with all love because one of the things I'm gonna say personally is, as a male Ifa priest, I know how important it is to put my head down before I shoot.
Mm. Oh, they yeah.
And so both chapters, like your chapter, the Oshun effect, and then Sheila Smith McCoy interviewed an Oshun priestess. And you know, I have Damishi says I'm on the warpath as a man when it comes to the female Orisha. And I did that in quotes because literally in that chapter, she's challenging this whole notion with gender. So Damishi was interviewed in the Yemonja text, and she actually in this chapter says she had a problem with the name of the first book, that it was
Hmm.
feminine. Like, so this is the first time this is public. She says it in the chapter, and I chuckle. And my co-editors thought I was gonna be mad. I said, no, it needs to be challenged because she was like, in this chapter, she says, I'm still trying to figure out what does feminine mean.
Hmm. Hmm.
And I was teaching a class this afternoon on, it's called the psychology of gender, and I was showing them a clip of men debating what is masculinity. And I think one of the things that is so critical for us as people, especially people of African descent on this side of the water, is to really have these conversations about what is masculinity, what is femininity, and how these Western paradigms have really, they don't fit who we are as African people.
Right.
they don't fit. And
Well,
so
they're paradigms that were constructed again for control, right?
exactly.
To keep everybody in a prescribed place to limit the ideas of what they're able to do.
So as a man who is initiated to Ifa, like I do, so this is personal, I do self-interrogation. And
Mm.
I'm intellectually, I'm fully transparent. My mother, when I was a little boy, when I was a preteen learning how to drive, and I had a problem with parallel parking. And she told me that one of my classmates, who was a girl, could parallel park. She said she didn't have a problem parallel parking. So I
Mm.
told my daddy, I said, we finna get back in the car. And I parallel parked that car like it was nothing. I came back in the house. My mama said, you ought to be ashamed of yourself. Took me, it took me appealing to your chauvinistic taste
Mm.
as a
Mm.
13-year-old boy. And so I say that, like putting it out there as as a conversation we need to have as a community, that I'm a recovering chauvinist. And so it is important for me as a male Ifa priest to put my head down to Oshun. Because when I was in Cuba, and I'm not calling any names, I met a young woman who was initiated to Oshun. And so she introduced me to her friend who was a Babalawo. And as you know, in Cuba, the only way a woman gonna get initiated to Ifa is if she's sick, or if Ifa
Right.
says something special, it's something like it's something she has to do, and she can't divine. So we were in a restaurant in Havana, and I was showing them a video of Oshun Damishi chanting Ifa. So the young sister in Cuba was like, "She's initiated Ifa." So I was like, "Yeah." And so I could see my homeboy, the Babalawo down there, he was getting a little tense. So I'm trying to respect the culture because I'm not in the United States. So, but still as a man, like you asked that question, what does that mean? I'm like, I'm being sensitive, but I'm not being a censor. So I'm showing it to her. I was like, yeah. And she was like, I've never seen a woman chant Ifa. So she said, she divines? I said, yeah. I said, sisters in the United States. In fact, I said, the truth be told, how I learned how to be a Yemonja priest was through the Oshun priesthood. How I learned how to be a proficient Ifa priest when I first started off was through Oshun Damishi. It
Mm.
was through a woman. And let me tell you, and you know this, Iya, I know male Babalawo, and I hope they listen. I know male Babalawo. They will not sit at her feet
Mm.
because she's a woman. But they like I have heard men say, and they like I know that Babalawo don't know as much as she does, but that's a man. They can't see
Definitely.
what I'm doing. They can't see
Right.
what
That
I'm
don't
like.
even make no sense. It's like I'm
It
gonna
don't.
take inferior knowledge because of where it's coming from, but it just goes to show how deep the indoctrination into patriarchy and misogyny are, right? And that's one of the reasons why, as I wrote this chapter on what I call the Oshun effect and on Beyonce, and why it was important to see her, regardless of, and why I said it was controversial is because it was very controversial. This idea that she was embodying Oshun or embodying African goddesses, particularly Oshun. But the for as much criticism came from that because people said, "Oh, well, she's not initiated and she's just using the tradition for popularity." And I'm like, Beyonce didn't need the tradition for popularity. Right? If anything, her presence in it is making it more popular. It's not making her more popular, right? And so, there are those who unfortunately want to gatekeep, right? And think that it's like, oh, well, enough people are in this now. Everybody wants to get into Orisha. And I say, good.
Good.
Everybody should want to get into it. It's for everybody, right? There's no barriers to entry. There's no this is for you and it's not for you. It is paradigms, right? And I love that you use that word. It is a paradigm that is meant to help everyone live better, right? And so those of us who are embodying it as priests, we're doing one part of it, but there's also the way, just in the same way that even people who are not practicing Christians may draw on Christian theology and ideology for encouragement, it's okay for folks to draw on our philosophies and ideologies for encouragement as well. And that's what I saw a lot of young Black women doing, particularly encouraged by seeing Beyonce do that, right? As the most popular female entertainer in the world, most popular entertainer, period, who has now, made history in so many different ways, just won her first Grammy for the best country album, and has broken down all of these different barriers that have been put up to Black women. And that's a positive thing. Now, is she a priest? Is she going to be the one to take people to the next level? No. But the introduction, right? How many young women came to me after seeing Lemonade or after seeing Black is King and said, we heard Beyonce mention Oshun. Can you tell us about Oshun? Can you tell us what this is about? Can you teach us more about this? That she was a catalyst for them coming and wanting to learn more. And to me, that's a part of that effect that was so powerful.
So, because I was like, I'm holding back. I was trying, because that masculine energy. I've been told that that Shango, Kabye Shango, and Ogun close. But when you were talking, I was like, don't be humble, because I want to go into your chapter. Because one of the things, like, I'm literally going to read an excerpt from your chapter, and the reason why, and I'm going to say this. Like my god sister, my sister, my sister Damisha, she said, like, you on a war path, especially when it comes to Oshun and Yemonja. And as a man, like, you asked the question, like, what does it mean as a man for, like, this whole notion of patriarchy and then the Oshun effect? And I confessed that I'm a recovering chauvinist. I think I have an issue with the limiting stereotypes that people have, particularly of Yemonja and Oshun.
Right.
Damisha messes with me because I don't know why people just think Yemonja is some grandmama who's sitting in a rocking chair.
Right.
Like that.
And that Oshun is the hot girl in the streets.
Exactly.
Right.
Like, I heard, and this is a little impolite, Damisha did a talk one time. She was like, for the record, let me clear the air. She was like, not all women who initiated to Oshun are beautiful. So I was like, what? But she was challenging this whole notion, like, Oshun is some kind of sexual, I'm gonna read, you say it better than me, because I'm trying to self-censor as a man. Let me read it. Can I read the excerpt from your?
Please. I'm honored by that.
It's a little. I ain't gonna read the full length, but I'm gonna read a couple of paragraphs. Of all the tunes Oshun is said to carry, the most powerful one is her mirror. The layperson mistakes this for a sign of her vanity. Those of us who know her a bit more intimately, however, recognize the mirror as the tool Oshun holds up to our faces when she requires us to do the difficult work of really seeing ourselves. That's from Joan Morgan. You cite Joan Morgan. Then you go on to say, far from an indication of vanity, Oshun's mirror is meant to inspire self-reflection in the present, as well as encouraging glances back to examine our past actions. Much like a car's rearview mirror, Oshun's looking glass symbolizes protection, as it enables one to see the things approaching from behind. So a part of the power of Beyonce's invoking Oshun is that it held up a giant, globally visible mirror that allowed young Black women to see a goddess reflected back at them rather than a hoochie mama, a nappy-headed hoe, a workhorse, a thought, a mammy, a Jezebel, a ghetto girl, or a tragic victim, all terms which have been applied to Black women in America. Religiously, it introduced many to a vision of female divinity with which Black American women, most of whom are at least nominally Protestant, were unfamiliar. I thought that was spot on. I thought because one of the issues that I did have, like this whole limiting notion of Oshun just being a damsel in distress type of woman.
Right.
And I always say, personally, and I try not to be disrespectful, she is the big boss lady. Cause I was like, where people will see that she married many male Orisha and assume something very derogatory. She every time she married a man, like I tell my partner this, I tell her this. Every time Ashul married a man, she came away with a skill set
That's
that
right.
made her a boss lady, that
That's
made
right.
her an Oba.
That's right. That's right.
That's power. Like, and so that to me, that's why. Because it was funny when I got initiated to Ifa. I was in Okshogbo, and I'm one of them people. I'm one of them priests. I don't do possession. I don't do it. I don't do it. They start playing the drums, especially when they play the drums. The Kabi Shango. I'm walking out the door. I don't do it. I'm standing by the Oshun River. I'm watching young brothers who are initiated to Ifa. They jumping up in her river. They passing out. Then all of a sudden, my eyes start rolling back, and one of the women Ifa priest was like, "Ifa Shola, you all right?" The other one said, "Get him away from the river." She taking all the male Ifa priests because that is her power.
That's right. That's right. That's right.
And
Like, y'all didn't think y'all did this, but I'm about to show you that there's water in your body, and that's me, that I can stir it up. Right?
And I love my family members talk about, I love being in a man's body. And when I came through 20 minutes later, it was like, what was it like? I was like, it felt like a million, for lack of a better word, Christmases. I had never experienced something so powerful, something so beautiful. And the term, the Oshun effect. So people, because I say the same thing, people can say what they want to say about Beyonce. Because, you know, at first I ain't gonna lie, I didn't understand the whole Beehive thing, but I give her props because I have young women in my class that literally want to study Orisha and womanism. Like I ain't gonna call no names. Some I know some Oshun priestesses. They do have an issue with Oshun being known as the ultimate womanist, and so that can be debated. That can be debated.
I mean, these terms, right? It's all about the terminologies, and at the end of the day, I'm like, I don't want to argue about terms. We know that all the words are made up. We make them all up to refer to whatever we're referring to. We don't have to call it womanism. We don't have to call it feminism. But if we are talking about the impetus to respect, to care for, to value women, then yes, Oshun is absolutely the ultimate of that, as is Yemoja, as are all of our female divinities. They demand respect and they encourage that respect. As we respect them, the same respect would transfer out into the respect that we have for human women, as Ifa says, that no one makes an enemy of water. No one who has any sense wants to make an enemy of women, because we all come through that sacred portal.
And I have to remind male Ifa priests. I was like, you do know where our power comes from as male Ifa priests.
Right. The Odu.
So like, yeah.
That's no, listen, we're gonna get too much, we're gonna do too much for him. We're gonna do too much for him, Mama. We're not even gonna go there. Well, I have had such a joyful time with you, and I just want to briefly, just state some of the other titles of the other chapters, just so folks know the fullness of what's in the book. Chapter 3, the earth itself is sacred, nature's personification in the Ifa religion, which is by Reza Parnell. We have place, space, and identity formation in Oyatunji Village by
Real
Kendra
quick,
Gray and
I know,
Antoinette Brown Waite.
I know we
Yes,
pressed for time, but I do want to say something like a proud father, all of them I love. But this chapter, that is needed because
you're talking about Parnell's chapter?
no, the McCrae and Brown
McRae and Brown Waite.
or Oyatunji Village.
Yes.
It's really needed because, and I'll say this, and I'll take all kind of hits, but as people of African descent in this country, the vast majority of us would not be Orisha priests if it was not for Oyatunji.
Absolutely. Oh, and anybody that debates you on that literally doesn't know the history of the tradition. Like, I mean, that's a fact. It's not even like it's not an opinion. That's a fact.
Because the
Pretty
whole
much
book,
almost any African American priest that you meet today, you know, some may have no connection at all and have gone straight to Nigeria, but for the most part, especially those of a certain age, if you trace back their eldership, you know, one or two steps back, it will lead back to Oyotunji.
and the very book itself is dedicated to the second Oba and his
Yes, Ibae.
mm-hmm. So that one was strategic because
Yes. I was very happy to see that there was a chapter on Oyotunji in here because the historical significance is so important. And I think that many of us really don't, especially because we're so, we're so spoiled now. We have so much at our fingertips and we really don't understand. I'm right there on that threshold of having lived before the internet and having had to do some of the work that I did to get into the tradition in an analog fashion and go meet people. And it's like people don't know what it was like back in the 70s and in this time when there was no internet, you couldn't just look stuff up. There were hardly any books that were in English. Like you had to pound the pavement. You had to go to where people were having celebrations. You had to go to where these lectures were happening, and if you were outside of major places like New York or Miami, you really, the access was so limited. And so to, do what was done at Oyotunji at that time was incredibly revolutionary, and to take it to the level of being on Oprah and being profiled in Life magazine and all of these different things that really brought so much attention and energy at that time was so revolutionary, so incredibly revolutionary.
It's so powerful. So
And nothing's perfect, right?
no,
And no one is perfect, but the significance really can't be overstated. And so it was really, really wonderful to see that chapter.
I think it's indicative of who we are as a people, like that constant evolution. I was talking with uh, my godmother, Tenibu, Oshun Tenibu, who is very much vested in Oyotunji. Her parents, as was written about in the chapter on Oyotunji, were mentioned. They were like pioneers of setting it up. So we were having a conversation this Saturday about where does Oyotunji go. So we talk about where does Oyotunji go, even from the very horrible event that happened at the end of last year. What is Oyotunji's place for us as a diaspora, if I may, African people here?
Yes. It's important. It's important to consider. And, what I find very important to consider is where is the next place going to be, right? That we develop. How do we have sovereignty? Because we are still, one of the main reasons that Baba Osejuman set out to found Oyotunji was because of the harassment and all that was going on of the community in New York and Harlem, where I'm from, Harlem World, where he first started the first temple, right?
Yeah.
The fact that police were raiding and taking the animals and doing these things. And guess what? Those things are still happening now.
They're still happening.
They're still happening now. And so, a sovereign land, right? A place where we can go and really do all that we do is so important. And I think that because things have become so easy for us, especially those who are on the younger end, have sort of lost the importance of that, the importance of land, the importance of a place that belongs to us. And so it's really, really important that we still kind of keep that understanding that we can't do anything without having a place to do it, right? Without having natural surroundings to work with. We are a nature-based tradition. Kosi ewe, kosi orisha. Like we have to have our plants, we have to have our earth, we have to have all of those things in order to do what we do. And so I really appreciate it as well, you know, like going back to Parnell's chapter about the earth itself being sacred and understanding ourselves as earth-based tradition. So important. We also have Kalila Ali's chapter, Looking Back to Look Forward, which talks about Akan and Yoruba science together, which I really appreciate. I always love looking at our traditions in comparison and contrast to each other, looking at where our collective ancestral knowledge as an African people converges, right, and how it's expressed differently in different cultures on the continent. Describing Inexplicable Ache by Vanessa Navarro Massa. We have Christianity and Ifa, which also was deeply touched my heart. As you know, my mother and I have a joint ministry, Reverend Iya, where we bring together Christianity and Ifa and seek to um, come to a place of understanding. And so that's a really powerful chapter, African Spirituality in an American Context. That's by Lawan Simpson Wilkie and Stephen Ageman Kohler. Mm-hmm. And then we have our last two chapters, When Mouths Can No Longer Fight and Breasts That Swing Are Like Ifa by Iya Joanna Hunter, Yanifa Omotinue. And finally, the chapter you mentioned earlier, A Bastard People Singing and Crying in the Wilderness, Ifa and the Chance at Legitimacy for Diasporic Africans in America by Michael Lindsay. This is a powerful collection, Baba. Like y'all did that. And I'm not, you know, I mean, listen, I was so excited beyond my own chapter. I was so excited to get it and to explore all of this. So the links to get the book will be in the show notes. How you can connect with Dr. Bridges, Baba Ifasola will also be in the show notes. Any final reflections you want to share about the whole experience of putting this book together, what it means, why you would encourage both practitioners, scholars, and those who are interested to read it?
You know, the three of us as editors, we this book, there were obstacles, and I think it really taught me, because many of us, including yourself, we experienced some severe, like, I don't like to say it, but we experienced some transitions of some dear loved ones, and then we dedicated the book to the Oba of Oyatunji. So it was, when it came and all of the political things, and I want to give props to Lexington Press, Bloomsbury, because to challenge Western paradigm as a scholar, you know, they could easily, and I'm not giving them any props, but to be open-minded enough to know.
No, absolutely. And to publish two books in close succession on the tradition.
And so you ask, like, you know, as far as the audiences, as far as practitioners and scholars, one of the things, and I'm going to say this because I tend to have mouth, it's important to be on the public square.
Yes.
But then there are some priests, and I know they may not have the academic credentials, but I hope that this book and this conversation leads to the fact that, yes, you can debate and argue on the intellectual public forums that's not owned by us, by the way, but we really need the practitioners, because it's really important that me as a scholar and a practitioner make sure the voices of practitioners that aren't in the academic world, their voices are heard,
Yes.
you know, and held in primacy. So I hope that when people read this book, they really feel that it's not just talking to the academic community, it is literally talking to the global Orisha family. That
Mm,
whether you are in the academy, whether you in the streets doing the work, you know, I have been lucky enough to go through the academy, but I'm always like you, I'm always kneeling before my elders. At the
yes.
end of the day, the elders are the well springs. I'm just like the intellectual person that puts it out there. But the elders hold this sacred knowledge because this it's unfortunately it's dying. It's really dying. And I think one of the charges that the elders are giving people like us is literally bringing this back and making sure that these traditions don't die and that they are like not only sacred but they have value for the future. And
That's right.
that's what I want readers to take from this.
Mm, mm. Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. Mm. Thank you again for being with us.
I
Thank
think
you all. You're so welcome. And thank you for all the love that you have shown to me. I want to publicly thank you for that. You have been a huge supporter. You showed me a lot of love for a long time and inviting me into to participating in this book and beyond. And so I'm grateful for that.
you
I
know you
encourage.
like you family now. Like we family.
That's
So
right. That's right. Listen, my play cousin, let's get it popping. Thank you all who have listened. Please do join us again for our next episode and pop on over to ADRSA.org to learn more. Odabo, take care, fam.